Yes, folks, I'm reading about God Almighty. I get excited about reading about God Almighty. There's some people that don't get as excited as me, but that's okay. Anyway, I'm in chapter 17 of Genesis. Abram has just been told he's going to be Abraham, and he's going to have some kids after him. Sure enough. And God said further to Abram, "Now as for you, you shall keep my covenant, and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations." Well, folks, don't worry about those generations anymore, because this covenant that's fixing to be talked about right here has already ended. It's over with. No more covenant of this one. It's over. "This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. And every male among you who is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations. Somebody born in the house or who is bought with money from any foreigner who is not of your descendants, who is born in your house, who is bought with money, shall surely be circumcised. Thus shall my covenant be in your flesh." There's the covenant that God is making in that day. That covenant is no longer in effect, folks. But it's in effect when I'm reading it right here, in case you didn't know. I'm in chapter 17. "But an uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant." Then God said to Abraham, "As for Sarah, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her," not a we. It's not Jesus blessing her. It's God Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. "I will bless her, and indeed I will give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall come from her." This is God telling what's going to happen. Is any word too difficult for God? Not if God says it. It's not. And these ignoramuses all over the earth believe Jesus is God. I hope they watch this video. I really do. They'll see Bob McGee don't think Jesus is God. That's what they'll know for sure, isn't it? Yep. "Abram fell on his face and laughed and said it in his heart, will a child be born to a man 100 years old, and will Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear the child?" And Abraham said to God, let's just let Ishmael do this. God said no. It's right here, verse 19. But God said no. Now, how many gods is talking to Abram? How many gods has told him his name is going to be Abraham? How many gods has been talking to him? One? Yeah, one. You got it. God said, "Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him." God's taking care of Abram and some descendants. The baby's not born yet, but he's going to be. And he's going to be named what? Isaac. Yeah, there's going to be another baby born after many, many years. And God named him too. Jesus. God named Jesus. You ought to figure out if God named Jesus, that God's not Jesus. Just thought I'd throw that in. I like to do that, especially right in the middle of a video. "As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will bless him and will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly, and he shall become the father of 12 princesses, and I will make him a great nation. Now who listened to Abram? Did Abram or Abraham talk to Jesus? No. God did, though. And God told him what I will do for your son Ishmael. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this season next year. In other words, it's on now, folks. Why? Because God said so. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. It's amazing how people don't want to read the history book. It just gets me to the utmost. And I'm 70 years old. I mean, Abram was 5 years older than me when he started this whole thing. You want to know what God can do? Why don't you read the history book and see what he did? I mean, it's pretty evident, what God can do when you see what God did. And he finished talking with him. God went up from Abram. Now look, folks, God was there. Imagine that. God was there with Abram. Yeah. And as you read along further, you get on over in here, you're going to find that God wrestles with Jacob. Jacob hadn't even been born yet. Matter of fact, at this time right here, Isaac hadn't even been born yet. Because Isaac's got to get old and get married and have children so that Jacob can be born, where God can say what he's going to do with them. Well, let me tell you what God's going to do with you if you don't believe what Jesus said. It's going to happen just like Jesus said. Well, what did Jesus say? Well, just so you'll know that I do know, I will tell you what Jesus said. Jesus said, I am the vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every in me which does not bear fruit, he cuts off and burns it. And every in me that bears fruit, he prunes it that it can bear more fruit. So, there you have the words from Jesus concerning what God can do. Who don't do it? God's going to do it. Yep, we're going to see what God can do. If you just keep reading the history book, you'll find out what God did. But he's fixing to appear in verse 18. Chapter 18, the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. And when he lifted up his eyes, he saw him. Behold, my Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. God's fixing to get his feet washed. And God's going to get something to eat. And Bob's going to get through with this video in about another minute, because 9 minutes is up. And Abram and Sarah were old, and Sarah laughed. And that's when the Lord said to Abram, I heard Sarah laugh. She's going to bear a child. Is anything too difficult? No, it's not too difficult. That's chapter 18. And things went on. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abram that what I am about to do? No, he didn't hide it. He told Abram what was going to happen. And that's when Abram tries to talk God into, Sodom and Gomorrah. We really don't want them destroyed. But chapter 19, we'll get to that sooner or later. I hope you're having a wonderful day.